My paranormal stories are a very long list. Some terrified me and still do to this day. I'm 27 and live in North Carolina, and that's where everything has happened. My first ever paranormal experience was when I was just 3 to 4 years of age, probably around 1992 or 93. I started having night terrors. I kept dreaming of these shadow dog figures, and in the dream my neighbor's dog, a chow breed, would burst through the window of my bedroom and save me. As time went on and I got a little older, I started to actually wake from the nightmare and see the shadow dog for real. At first I thought it was our black dog because he was short, and so was this shadow. I called out to him, but this creature wasn't him. This continued for several months, and I would scream for my mother. She ended up getting worried and sleep deprived. She then took me to a psychiatrist, and they ran tests to find nothing wrong. It kept happening, and I ended up having severe anxiety from it, and still do. This never stopped and has continued into my adulthood. I never told anyone but my mom because it was evident even at a young age that people would label me crazy. Until we moved across the street and my best friend's family moved in, it took 4 years for my best friend to have the same problem. I never told her either because she is an easy scare. When she turned 16, she finally told me what had been happening. I almost cried and finally knew it wasn't just me. She had to endure countless things at her new home with me anyway, so I couldn't bear to tell her about her family's home. She stood with me in our kitchen listening to stuff getting thrown around. I've always been super sensitive to things like this, and they tend to be extreme at times. The most recent thing that happened to me in her family home was in 2013. I went to clean for her father, and he had to go to an appointment and left me there alone to clean his son's room. The room. As I was in there organizing all of his toys, something said, "Let's play again." It sent shivers through me, and my entire body was covered in goosebumps. Fight or flight kicked in, and faster than a cat, I was off the floor and out the front door. After smoking a cig and talking to my mother, I got the nerve to go back in there. I started to yell scripture at it and told it to leave that room and to leave me alone. Well, it did leave the room, but not the house. I could hear it walking, almost pacing back and forth in the hallway. And this man has no animals in the home. I started praying over the whole room to keep his son safe and protected. I started to feel calm and safe and thought I had actually done something. But no, I hadn't. My friend's father was polling in the driveway. I was so relieved because the presence is afraid of him for some reason. You can feel it cower and leave. After that, I started having very bad night terrors to the point I would wake up in tears. A 24-year-old woman then, I felt so unsafe, and it made me feel inferior when I am normally very strong-minded. It got so bad that I would wake up choking, and one time I woke up and was choking myself. I had dreams of Satanist churches and a small boy throwing his twin sister off a balcony at a Satanist church as a sacrifice to Lucifer. I will never forget this. It's like yesterday and still so vivid. My ex witnessed me talking and growling in another language. I rolled over like I had never even been asleep, and he looked terrified. I asked if he was okay, and he told me I had been doing that for 3 hours. I told him not to worry because I used to sing in Latin in my high school choir, and maybe it was my subconscious. But the growling, I cannot explain. The night terrors continued, and knocks, and doors flying open, the sound of footsteps, things going missing never to be seen again. A friend of mine introduced me to a psychic via Facebook. She told me to bless a quartz crystal and how to do so. I did, and it helped me tremendously with my night terrors and protected me in many bad situations. Now though, I'm living with my current boyfriend in his mother's home where a murder took place. 2 homes right beside each other, and both had to be blessed by priests. We live near a creek that used to be a Native American settlement. His family has planted blueberry bushes on both properties. Still though, I pick up on something present on the land, and I've heard a residual gunshot in the home. After I heard the shot, 2 days later I was lying down for bed, and something ran a finger up my side, and I jumped closer to my boyfriend and wouldn't let go of him. I was shaking. You would think it wouldn't bother me by now, but in fact it still does. Everywhere I live in this town has some kind of paranormal occurrence. Last year I woke up to my friend calling my name at 8:30 a.m. I looked all over the house for her and found nothing. I put my clothes on thinking maybe she was in distress and needed me, so I got in my car and headed over there. She met me at the door and asked if I had been there. I hadn't, and I told her this, asking her why as well. She told me she woke up at 8:30, same as me, to the sound of me calling her name. Luckily I had brought my sage and told her it was time to cleanse the home again. I went to every corner of the home, starting in the basement, and sent the presents out her front door. She did as I did, of course, because the land and home belonged to her, making it more effective. Well, I got home and realized I had royally messed up because it had followed me. So many terrible things followed. I smudged my father's home where I was staying because my sister was doing drugs and becoming increasingly more violent, which wasn't actually normal, even on the drugs. I decided to get my sage out and cleanse the home. I had done this before with no ill reaction from my sister or father. They didn't even know I had done it the other times. I asked God to protect my family from any harm or violence. My sister came in right after I was done and started trying to scream at me. She instantly started choking on her own words and could not cuss me. She couldn't even look me in the face. Her drug use would counteract my cleanse somehow after a week or 2. This is what prompted the crystals. Being a sensitive and empath, I know I will never get away from these occurrences, but I'm trying to keep a level head and not be frightened, which has been hard for me to do. Over the course of my 49 years of life, I have had many paranormal experiences. In my early life, I heard an electrical buzzing sound, or maybe something like a swarm of bees leaving my dad's room on the 3rd day of his passing. The sound was heard clearly inside our house, and all of us present followed it out our back door and heard it leaving our house and going up into the night sky. Later in my life, I lived in many houses that had paranormal issues. I told people over those years that is why the rent was so cheap. I experienced a ghost black cat that would not let me cross the street one evening. That one freaked me out because I could see his silhouette, but my hand passed right through him when I tried to pet him. And yet another incident with an animal happened one evening a few years ago in my sister's apartment. She had 3 dogs, and the oldest one was put down due to health issues that were causing him a lot of pain. My wife and I stayed one evening, and we had to sleep on the living room floor because it was my sister's last evening at the apartment, and she had already moved all the beds. My sister was going to sleep on her couch with her other 2 small dogs. As my wife and I settled in and lights were out, my wife suddenly said, "There is a freaking dog lying on my feet." I also felt it, but just to make sure, I moved and started to rub his side with my right foot. I could feel his firm coat, but oddly not warm. I reached over for the flashlight, and when I turned on the light, there was no dog at her feet, and the other two were lying on the couch with my sister. My wife said it felt like it floated down on her foot and not walked on her makeshift bed. About 19 years ago, I had a friend who passed at the young age of 25. I'm convinced he came back to thank me in a dreamlike state for something I said about him. Not long after this happened, I was lying on my bed one morning and heard a coin hit the floor, somewhere either in our kitchen or living room. It was still dark, and I had my eyes closed, but I could hear this coin coming down the long 50-foot hallway straight to the foot of my bed. Then it started to go around in circles until it vibrated to a stop. As soon as it stopped vibrating, my alarm clock went off, and it was exactly 5 a.m. I heard my wife, who was sleeping with my daughter in the other room, get up and go to the kitchen. As I was getting ready to leave, I stopped at my front door as my wife said, "Do you know what woke me up this morning?" I immediately said, "A penny." Then I said, "Wait a minute, I haven't even seen it yet." As we both walked back the hallway, I stopped in disbelief at what I saw on the hallway. I said, "What's wrong with this picture?" First, I had a plywood floor that in some places the coin would have had to jump over a 1/8 inch. What was even more amazing was that my wife had laundry all over the floor in a zigzag pattern that would have made it impossible for the coin to travel in a straight line. When I finally reached the foot of my bed, it was indeed a penny. Now my last story is one of my brother-in-law, who passed a few years ago. His passing really took the wind out of my sail. He was my go-to guy when I needed healing. On Valentine's Day, 10 months after he passed, my wife and I were headed home when all of a sudden my SUV radio stations started switching to different channels and the volume display was going up and down until it stopped on one song. The song playing was about dying young. It played all the way home until I reached my driveway and stopped my car. I went inside my house and cried. I told my brother-in-law if he could hear me to please know he didn't have to prove to me that he was still around. I told him it was not the same as before because we can't have a normal conversation. Fast forward a few months, and I was at the end of my rope arguing with my young daughter one night. As my daughter slammed the front door and went outside, I said out loud in front of my wife, "I hope my brother-in-law scares the you-know-what out of her." I regret this request for the rest of my life. A few days later, my daughter was better than normal in her behavior. She seemed to be the nicest person in the world, and she was doing all of her chores. When I asked my wife what was up, she told me I think it's better she tells you so you can explain. I had no idea what she was talking about. I called my daughter to my room. She began by apologizing and starting to tell me about that night we argued. She said after she cooled off and came back inside the house, she went straight to bed. During the night, she said she felt something pick her up and lay her down on the carpet next to her bed. She woke up, but was too scared to open her eyes. She then felt herself being dragged across the carpet and could feel the fibers dragging across her face until she came to a stop. As she summoned herself to open her eyes, she found herself in the middle of our hallway. She got up and ran back to her room and covered her eyes with her bed sheets. Reluctantly, I told her what I said that night and vowed never to repeat it. I told her that our loved ones need to be at rest and should never have to come back to solve our problems. I told her we should never open doors we cannot close because sometimes unwanted spirits cross over and cause more tension in our lives. Nevertheless, this incident came with both positive and negative results in our relationship. She is still somewhat in denial of the paranormal and wishes to put the whole incident behind her. My experience happened on July 21st, 2009, in Belmead, Texas, just 15 days after my mother passed away. After my mother died, I moved in with my sister. One day we all had plans. My sister and her family were leaving to go out of town, and my 1-year-old nephew was very attached to me, so I decided to keep him and take him with me to the bookstore. My brother-in-law turned some rock music on while everyone was getting ready, when all of a sudden the stereo switched to country music and the volume went up really loud. My mother always listened to country music on that stereo. Then, I was in my room getting ready, and my sister told me that they would let me know when they were leaving. She had not done that yet, so I assumed they were still home and that she was in her bedroom getting ready as well. I knocked on her door and I heard someone tell me very loudly and clearly, "Just a minute." So I stood there waiting for her to let me in. Finally, after standing there for quite a while, I knocked again and nobody answered that time. I yelled my sister's name and no response. So I walked in her room and the light was on, but there was no one there. I looked out the front door and a car was gone. I was really freaked out. I got my nephew ready and we went to the bookstore. My sister was not due to be back for a few hours, and I knew I was not staying by myself after that happened. So I made sure everything was turned off, locked the door, and we left. My sister only had one house key because she lost the other key, and she gave the key to me because I was going to be back before them. I stayed at the bookstore for a while, then decided to go home because I knew my sister would be home in an hour or so. I got home, unlocked the door, and as soon as I walked in, I heard water running. I ran into the kitchen and the sink was flooding over. There was water all over the floor and water coming out of the faucet full blast. That water was not left on before, and I was the only person with a key to unlock the door to get back into the house. Later that night, my sister and her husband were going to see a movie, so I reluctantly agreed to stay by myself and babysit. That evening I made a big pallet of cushions on the living room floor and was going to put a movie on for us to watch. But before I turned on the movie, I gathered all 4 kids and told them they needed to clean their mess up first. My 3-year-old niece refused to help clean up, so I told her to get up and help or she was not going to watch the movie. She again refused. All of a sudden, she started crying and I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that Nanny, who was my mother who passed away almost 3 weeks before, told her that she had to behave for Aunt Holly, me, and help the other kids clean up the mess. I was really freaked out. My niece continued to talk to her nanny, my mother, for months after she passed away, and when we would ask her where Nanny was, she would tell us that she was floating on the ceiling. My sister and her husband got home around 11 p.m. that night, and everyone went to bed, but I just couldn't sleep, so I decided to stay up and watch a movie. While I was watching the movie, my brother-in-law came bursting out of his bedroom door and was incredibly freaked out. He said that he felt a human grab his foot while he was sleeping, and as he woke up and turned around, he saw my mother standing at the end of his bed, which made sense because my sister would always send my mother in to wake him up from a nap, and she would grab his foot playfully to wake him. We had many experiences like that for a while. We had a birthday party for my oldest niece on January 28, 2010, and we took a lot of pictures. Later on, when we went back to look at the pictures, we noticed that in every picture there was an orb above my niece's head. There were pictures of my niece opening gifts, of her playing outside. In every picture she was doing something totally different and in different rooms of the house, and the orb was still above her head. And we obviously think that it is our mother visiting her for her birthday, because our mom loved us and her grandkids very much, and she actually lived with my sister for years before her death. When I moved in 3 days after she died, I moved in her room, and sometimes I felt her presence in that room and would feel someone touching my hair or rubbing my back, which is something she always did to me to show that she loved me. I know this is probably not scary to some people, but to me, it was very, very scary, even though it was my mom. I'm a 22-year-old girl, and the following incident happened when I was 17 years old. I live in Kerala, India with my family, consisting of my dad, mom, and younger brother. We moved to this house 2 years back, and everything was normal. I usually go to sleep very late at night, spending time reading books or listening to music. One night after listening to music for a very long time, I became sleepy and removed my headphones. I clearly remember checking the time, and it was around 3 a.m. I was simply lying down to try to sleep, and that's when I heard a sound. Concentrating further, I was able to understand that it was a weeping sound, and probably from a little child, and it was coming from the next room. I immediately checked the other 2 rooms for my parents and brother, and they were all sound asleep. We all keep our doors open at night. I also checked the neighborhood for lights, and I couldn't find any. I was really confused and went to the dining room from where the sound was heard louder. I asked who it was, and suddenly the weeping was heard from the living room. I followed the sound into the living room and repeated the same question, and now the sound started coming from my room. I became really confused this time and went to my room. As soon as I entered my room, the weeping sound stopped abruptly. Before this, I had never experienced any paranormal activity, though I strongly believed in it. My grandmother had told me plenty of her paranormal experiences. I decided to let it go and get some sleep. I closed my door and climbed into my bed, where I heard a knock on my door. At the same time, there was a thud on my window. By this time, I got a bit scared and got under my covers and was finally able to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I felt really stupid and tried to dismiss the experiences as my imagination. When I told my mom about this, she asked me to lock my door at night and to get to sleep early. I thought it was all over, but from that day I felt a presence with me in my room every night. It never tried to communicate with me or scare me, but I could always feel it with me at night when I'm home alone. This continued into the following year when I entered college and moved to a hostel. I no longer felt the presence around me, not even when I came back to the house to spend vacations. After a year or two, however, I got a frantic phone call from my mother about her experience the previous night. That night she was laying on the bed unable to sleep when she heard a weeping from a little child. She got really afraid because she knew that nobody in the house was awake during that hour, and she listened carefully without making any noise or getting out of the bed. As she listened, the weeping got louder, and she realized that whatever it was approaching her. She was terrified and searched for the light switch. The sound got closer, and at the last moment she was able to switch on the light, and the sound abruptly stopped. She immediately got out of the bed and locked the door. She slept with lights on that night. When she woke up in the morning, she remembered about my experience and called me. She started locking her door at night, and neither of us heard that sound again. March 2015, Orlando, Florida. My children, wife, family, and friends have all experienced paranormal activity in this house. There isn't just one ghost, but so many over the years due to previous occupants playing with the Ouija board. In 2009, my neck was broken in a bicycle accident, I have had 2 MRIs and pain management pills and spinal shots. In March 2015, I was so sick as never being able to sleep in the constant pain that I asked the spirits in my house to just take me. What happened next, I have never seen in any story. I would regularly have my son sleep with his mother because I could not sleep and the pain was worse at night. So on the night of the first experience, I think I fell asleep at 4 a.m. with my little dog in bed with me and Pitbull on the floor next to the bed. I felt 3 fingers held together press underneath the bed on my lower back, and the pressure got stronger and stronger. These fingers started to go up my spine, and I looked at my little dog next to me as she was freaking out. Then the bed lifted off the floor a foot as these fingers went up my spine and my lower half was frozen. When this presence went all the way up to my skull, I thought for sure it was trying to invade my body. So I said, "Leave me now!" And the bed dropped to the floor. The next day I called my sister and told my wife because we all have had experiences and events in this house over and over. So 20 days from that event, I was working on my SUV in the front driveway and asked my wife to come outside and stand next to the jack while I was working inside the wheel well with the tire on. I felt the lower part of my back disc start to separate one by one. There was a previous operation there at L5 to L7. Then there was an electrical charge that started from that area so strong I could feel it go through my back, up through my arms and out my fingers. The same thing with my legs and down to my toes. This hurt so bad, it felt like holding on to 120 volts and just staying there. I screamed really loud, and my neck snapped so loud my wife heard it outside the vehicle. I fell to the ground, and first moved my fingers and then legs to see if I could even move, and I could, just fine. I got up and told my wife that I felt different, really different, and asked her to feel my disc in my neck by my skull that would stick out a half an inch. My wife didn't feel it anymore, and I felt better, but not perfect yet. The following week I went to my pain management doctor, and I didn't tell her the true story of what had happened, only that my neck snapped back into place. At this point, doctors only wanted to surgically remove my problem disc, so the doctor prescribed more pills, but I didn't tell her I had stopped taking the pills I was on for the past 6 years. I wanted to see where this was going to take me. So 21 days from the first event, again I still wasn't perfectly sleeping due to pain still under my upper back and neck, but what changed was that I could now sleep on my side, which I wasn't able to do for years, and my arms were not going to sleep over and over again like they did through the night. Again sleeping with my little dog in my son's bed, I awoke at 3 a.m. with a hand on my left shoulder and what felt like a knee in the center of my back and a hand on my lower right shoulder. The ghost pushed forward with so much force it put my right shoulder back into socket, which I had no idea was even out. Once that was done, I haven't had the level of pain I lived in for the past 6 years. After this, I was scheduled to have another doctor visit, and I told the doctor the true story and that I would no longer need the pills. She believed me. I'm looking back into the records to possibly find if maybe there was a chiropractor that lived in the house in the past. Holy fucking shit. My paranormal stories are a very long list. Some terrified me and still do to this day. I'm 27 and live in North Carolina, and that's where everything has happened. My first ever paranormal experience was when I was just 3 to 4 years of age, probably around 1992 or 93. I started having night terrors. I kept dreaming of these shadow dog figures, and in the dream my neighbor's dog, a chow breed, would burst through the window of my bedroom and save me. As time went on and I got a little older, I started to actually wake from the nightmare and see the shadow dog for real. At first I thought it was our black dog because he was short, and so was this shadow. I called out to him, but this creature wasn't him. This continued for several months, and I would scream for my mother. She ended up getting worried and sleep deprived. She then took me to a psychiatrist, and they ran tests to find nothing wrong. It kept happening, and I ended up having severe anxiety from it, and still do. This never stopped and has continued into my adulthood. I never told anyone but my mom because it was evident even at a young age that people would label me crazy. Until we moved across the street and my best friend's family moved in, it took 4 years for my best friend to have the same problem. I never told her either because she is an easy scare. When she turned 16, she finally told me what had been happening. I almost cried and finally knew it wasn't just me. She had to endure countless things at her new home with me anyway, so I couldn't bear to tell her about her family's home. She stood with me in our kitchen listening to stuff getting thrown around. I've always been super sensitive to things like this, and they tend to be extreme at times. The most recent thing that happened to me in her family home was in 2013. I went to clean for her father, and he had to go to an appointment and left me there alone to clean his son's room. The room. As I was in there organizing all of his toys, something said, "Let's play again." It sent shivers through me, and my entire body was covered in goosebumps. Fight or flight kicked in, and faster than a cat, I was off the floor and out the front door. After smoking a cig and talking to my mother, I got the nerve to go back in there. I started to yell scripture at it and told it to leave that room and to leave me alone. Well, it did leave the room, but not the house. I could hear it walking, almost pacing back and forth in the hallway. And this man has no animals in the home. I started praying over the whole room to keep his son safe and protected. I started to feel calm and safe and thought I had actually done something. But no, I hadn't. My friend's father was pulling in the driveway. I was so relieved because the presence is afraid of him for some reason. You can feel it cower and leave. After that, I started having very bad night terrors to the point I would wake up in tears. A 24-year-old woman then, I felt so unsafe, and it made me feel inferior when I am normally very strong-minded. It got so bad that I would wake up choking, and one time I woke up and was choking myself. I had dreams of Satanist churches and a small boy throwing his twin sister off a balcony at a Satanist church as a sacrifice to Lucifer. I will never forget this. It's like yesterday, and still so vivid. My ex witnessed me talking and growling in another language. I rolled over like I had never even been asleep, and he looked terrified. I asked if he was okay, and he told me I had been doing that for 3 hours. I told him not to worry because I used to sing in Latin in my high school choir, and maybe it was my subconscious. But the growling, I cannot explain. The night terrors continued, and knocks, and doors flying open, the sound of footsteps, things going missing never to be seen again. A friend of mine introduced me to a psychic via Facebook. She told me to bless a quartz crystal and how to do so. I did, and it helped me tremendously with my night terrors and protected me in many bad situations. Now though, I'm living with my current boyfriend in his mother's home, where a murder took place. 2 homes right beside each other, and both had to be blessed by priests. We live near a creek that used to be a Native American settlement. His family has planted blueberry bushes on both properties. Still, the